You know, when I get depressed about the word journalism being thrown around and people acting like they are when they're not, or people claiming they saw news because it was on their Facebook feed, it cheers me up when I think Rick Pearson's out there. Rick Pearson's out there. He's reporting. This is the intergalactic journalist. This is the best political journalist in the history of the universe. I mean, you can go to Neptune. You can go to Uranus. You can go to anybody's anus for that matter. You can go for Pluto, to the sun and back. I mean, nobody does it better than my old pal Rick Pearson at the Chicago Tribune. Hi, buddy.
Hey, what do I got to get you for Christmas for that one? Wow.
I probably could have done without the Uranus reference, but you know me, I couldn't resist.
That.
All right, now this is a complicated story, but it's an important story, and obviously, as usual, you've done a great job reporting it, about this Democratic PAC that just got whacked with a huge state election board fine. What do we know, and how do you explain it to us?
It isn't really that complicated. It's just a lot of little line drawings here to connect the dots. But a PAC that was a political action committee that was basically being led by the president of the Illinois Senate, Don Harmon, to raise and spend money on behalf of two Illinois Supreme Court candidates in last year's election. It was a big election to decide which party controls the state Supreme Court. And this PAC, called All for Justice, was an independent expenditure PAC. It was not supposed to coordinate with the candidates, but it raised money from Harmon, from other Democratic politicians, from labor groups, traditional Democratic allied groups, and it spent $7.3 million on behalf of the campaigns of Elizabeth Rockford and Mary Kay O'Brien, who ended up being the winners and expanded the Democratic majority on the Supreme Court from 4-3 to 5-2. Now, in spending that $7.3 million, they violated state election law because they didn't timely report spending money and didn't report what they spent it on or who they spent it for, as required by the law. Under the law, they were required within 2 days to file reports to the state saying, we spent X on X for X. They didn't do any of that. They didn't do any of those reports until after January, well after 3 months after the election. So no one really had any idea of the spending that this group was doing and what they were spending on.
Who caught them?
Well, we reported about this in February, and the State Board of Elections took notice. And in August of this year, the group was assessed a fine. The PAC was assessed a fine of $99,500, which is one of the largest fines that the state has ever levied against a politician or a political committee. And they found 35 instances where this PAC had spent money and didn't timely report it. The PAC was notified in early August that they were going to be fined. This fine was coming. And weeks later, just a couple of weeks later, the person in charge of the PAC, Luke Casson, who was an attorney very close to Don Harmon, he transferred out all the money out of that PAC so that their bank balance was zero and transferred into a long dormant other political action committee, which shares the same address as All for Justice and also is the same address as Luke Casson's law firm.
All right, a couple of things as a follow-up here. One is fines are supposed to be a deterrent. And I have heard for most of my adult life in this business, especially in talk radio when we talk about these things, that the larger the PAC, the larger the money set aside, almost budgeted for fines, because the fines are never legally large enough to be a deterrent to keep them from being shady and hoping they don't get caught. Does that play into this at all?
Well, I mean, there was certainly the suggestion here when you're talking about the millions of dollars that passed through this PAC. It ended. It had about $150,000 left in, and there was a belief here that this PAC was big enough that, well, fines are just the cost of doing business.
Right.
Right. But nevertheless, this was a huge fine, and the fact that the PAC's bank account got emptied raised even more questions. It's like, well, if you have the money, why don't you pay the fine? But then if you transfer it out, are you trying to subvert the fine by pleading poverty and saying, well, you can fine us because there's no money in the bank account to pay it.
I mean, it's basically money laundering. It's money
Yeah.
laundering. You know, it's an elevated form. My word, not yours. My word's not yours. It's an elevated form of money laundering. Moving money here so you don't find it there, and things of that nature. But then the larger, murkier waters here, Rick Pearson, are just the whole PAC game, and political action committees in general, and the pollution that they cause every election cycle.
Well, and it's even tougher when you're dealing with these independent expenditure PACs because these are the ones that are super PACs. This is not a dark money PAC, which is a whole other category of its own, which can raise and spend money, and you don't even know who the source is. With this independent expenditure PAC, we do know who the source of the money was. And in fact, while they didn't timely report how they spent the money, they did file the timely reports on where they got the money from. So obviously, they knew what the law was here, and why they're trying to disregard it was for the practical purposes of avoiding the scrutiny.
If you go with the notion that both parties are shady, it just depends on who's in charge. Democrats are always in charge here, and the shady Democrats are trying to accomplish what in this case? Because you're not going to spend a couple of $1 million in one judge's race unless there's something on the other end.
Well, this was the biggest judicial race in the state. Where these
so is this a rich guy doing a favor for his buddy?
Oh, it's not really. Well, this isn't. When you talk about Luke Casson,
yeah.
I mean, obviously, he knows what he's doing, and Don Harmon is the Senate president. He knows what he's doing. These guys have known each other for years. Casson's head of the Oak Park Democratic Organization, which is Don Harmon's political base. I mean, the bottom line is why?
Right.
I mean, the money, the money is there to pay the fine, one. So why try to subvert the fine paying process?
Right.
When I asked him, are you trying to subvert the fine paying? Why did you transfer that money to this dormant PAC? He said, it's none of your business.
Oh, yeah, well, actually it is.
Well, and actually that's called the money quote in journalism. So
right.
But yeah, obviously this stinks, and it stinks to high heaven. And the thing is, Steve, about campaign finance and PACs and all of that, this system, it stinks. And, if you build in certain provisions for timely reporting so that people are supposed to be able to observe where the money's flowing in politics. And if you ignore that, you basically subverted the system.
And Rick Pearson, going forward from this, what strikes me as the sad, sick, twisted irony of all this, Ed Burke's on trial. Madigan's going to be on trial next spring in some form, we believe. So these are two of your bigger dogs. And nobody in the shady Democrat side, I'm not throwing all Democrats in the same pile anymore, and I'm throwing all Republicans in the same pile. But those who choose to abuse, they're not deterred by the fact that, oh, geez, they got Burke. They're going to get Madigan. Maybe I better be careful. It doesn't seem to be a deterrent.
Look at the history of political trials, and it's always federal court. Number one, but look at that history, and when has it ever served as a deterrent? I mean, just go back to after George Ryan gets 6.5 years, that's followed by Rod Blagojevich, who pledged to reform government. He gets 14. I mean, it's this belief of some that when you're in power and you're in control, you can do no wrong, and among a certain attitude of certain politicians who have these huge egos and tend to think they're the smartest people in the room, and that they'll never get caught.
Well, and that's why we need you out there. We're glad you're out there, and this is another example of great reporting. You get it in Chicago Tribune, chicagotribune.com. And just so you know, Rick, I don't know if you want to do a cover story about this, but I've changed the quote. It's not power corrupts and absolute power corrupts. Absolutely. It's now power corrupts and makes you a dumbass. Shorter, more to the point.
It fits the bumper sticker better, yeah.
Yes, it does. Thank you, buddy. I'll be around.
Hey, thank you. Hope you guys had a great Thanksgiving.
You too, man. Rick Pearson. I see him at the grandfather meeting.
Do you?
Yeah, he's a grandfather.
I'd like to know about his Thanksgiving. Fascinating story, though.
It's just so, but the
It's
whole
like
thing.
secular. It never ends.
Burke trial, Madigan trial.
You think you get caught? Nope.
And here's a
gonna do it
story that
anyway.
would have been boiling under if Pearson and the Tribune didn't go after it.
Well, and you think about, he's been writing stories since forever, but everyone's writing the stories all the time. Like, it's out there. We've written the stories, we've heard
Gotta go
about
get
it, but yet people are still doing it.
You got to go get it.